Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. It's Christine with gaugegirltraining, an online meal planning and coaching service. I'm an author, food scientist, and chemical engineer, and in today's video, we are going to discuss carb tolerance. So let's get started. So carb tolerance is a measure of how many carbohydrates your body can process on a biochemical level. On one end of the spectrum, we have our hard gainers, we have our ectomorphs, we have the folks who can eat and eat and eat carbohydrates. They have the highest tolerance and they never gain an ounce. On the other end of the spectrum, we have folks with type 2 diabetes where their body just cannot process or manage insulin. So figuring out where you fall on that spectrum is going to dictate how many carbohydrates you should be eating per day. And your carb tolerance is the number one factor that is going to dictate the most appropriate macronutrient ratios you should be consuming. So in today's video, I'm going to discuss 6 factors that impact your carb tolerance and how you can figure out with a very special and easy quiz on my website what your level is. So the first thing that impacts your carb tolerance level is your glucose metabolism. Glucose metabolism is a measure of how efficiently your body can metabolize carbohydrates. So every time you consume a carb, what happens is your body has a spike in blood sugar. That happens because carbohydrates are broken down into the simplest form, which is a unit of glucose. It is the smallest sugar molecule. And that is normal. You eat a carb, it breaks down in the blood sugar goes up. The rate at which your blood sugar decreases is a measure of your glucose metabolism. So this could be tested in the lab. This could be tested more based off of intuition on the feeling of how your body feels after you consume a meal with carbohydrates. Now, as you can see in this chart, if you have a normal glucose metabolism, you can see there is a spike in the blood sugar and then it comes back down to normal within a short period of time. If you are pre-diabetic, you can see that your body experiences a steeper spike in your blood glucose levels. It is higher than under the normal condition, and this is because it takes your body longer to take all of the glucose out of the blood and facilitate it and move it into the cells. Last but not least, we are looking at a diabetic person whose fasted blood glucose levels are higher. You can see there's a baseline higher level of blood glucose. The level not only goes extremely high, yes, it comes down, but the rate at which it comes down is substantially slower. Under those conditions, the worse your glucose metabolism is, the less carbs you want to consume per day. The next thing you want to look at is the sex hormones, and all of this is explained in depth in chapter 4 of my book, Unlock Your Macrotype. So specifically, the sex hormones, we're talking about estrogen, we are talking about progesterone, we are talking about testosterone. Now specifically for women, I'm going to talk about the impacts of estrogen. So when your estrogen levels are low, estrogen is in fact the most important hormone in females for regulating mood as well as productive health. Now, when women have lower levels of estrogen, this happens during perimenopause, this happens during menopause, this happens in women with PCOS, it does tend to lead to insulin resistance when estrogen levels are low. So low estrogen would be ideal to consume lower levels of carbohydrates and going higher in your dietary fats. The next thing you want to consider is in the case of high estrogen. Now, high estrogen typically means high estrogen relative to progesterone, which is a situation called estrogen dominance. Now, excess estrogen does lead to health issues such as weight gain, abnormal bleeding, breast sensitivity, tenderness, fatigue, bloating, depression, and mood swings. So in the case of estrogen dominance, a woman's first priority does need to be to rebalance the hormones. And this does not necessarily mean eliminating carbs. It does mean going moderately low in carbohydrates, however, making a drastic shift in carbohydrate quality, being more in vegetables, more cruciferous vegetables, higher in fiber, and moving away from the refined sugars and starches. Now, when a woman's testosterone levels are low, this is something I don't typically talk about on this channel, but low testosterone is definitely a case where women actually want to be consuming moderate amounts of carbohydrates, moderate amounts of quality carbohydrates. So you don't want to go extremely low if your testosterone levels are low as a female. So the next thing is your thyroid hormones. And if your thyroid hormones are out of whack, it can feel like you literally have no metabolism. And it's a really big problem. And one of the biggest things I see people do when they have thyroid issues, low metabolism, they immediately want to go lower in calorie. And you have to remember, a thyroid issue is not the time to start drastically cutting your calories, because you do want to keep your metabolism higher, and low calorie is not the way to do that, and extremely low carb is not necessarily the answer. If this is the case for you, you definitely want to avoid inflammatory foods. You definitely want to avoid dairy. You want to avoid gluten. It's best to avoid grains. You want to really reconsider food quality, going organic where you can. But the first approach I would say is to not necessarily go on a ketogenic or very, very low carb approach, but going on a lower carb approach. So what do I mean by lower carb? I'm going to say probably somewhere between 50 and 100 total carbohydrates. That's probably going to be a better range. You probably don't necessarily want to go under 50 carbs if you have hypothyroidism. However, I have seen some individuals where that does work, but it is not the case for most. So the next thing that impacts your carb tolerance levels are your digestive enzymes. And specifically, there is an enzyme called amylase that helps your body break down carbohydrates. Amylase is in the saliva, and it is also in the stomach. However, it is very interesting to know that there is a genetic component and there is a gene called AMY1 that is very specific to regions and hereditary type things in the individual. So there are folks with low carb tolerance where genetically, based off of where you were raised, where your family and tribe is originally from, definitely has an impact on that. So specifically, researchers have found a direct correlation between the number of AMY1 copies and how long ago a person's ancestors transitioned from hunter-gatherers to agricultural-based societies. So agricultural societies, such as Asian farming societies, have evolved to have more copies of the AMY1 gene and thus higher carb tolerance levels. So that's maybe why Filipinos have much higher carb tolerance, because our family has just eaten so much dang rice. It is very interesting to know that there is a genetic element to your carb tolerance level, and it is based on the number of copies of the AMY1 gene present in your body. So the next thing is gut health. Gut health is extremely important, and it does impact the perception of your carb tolerance. So what I end up seeing when I start working with a client one-on-one, or someone who approaches me with the need for a custom plan, when your gut health is compromised, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go low carb. It probably means that you need to go lower in inflammatory foods. Gut health can mean that your gut is hyperpermeable, where food that leaches out causes inflammation, and that can definitely be an issue. There can be food triggers. There could be the result of excess alcohol, antibiotics, refined foods, leaky gut syndrome, whole 9 yards. I don't necessarily recommend folks who have gut inflammation issues to just switch off and start going very, very low carb like keto. I would suggest moderate carb, but going in a lower FODMAP approach. FODMAP stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. I have another video explaining what that is, what foods you should eliminate, and if you need help with a customized protocol because you do have gut health issues and IBS triggers, you want to be on a specific elimination protocol, but it doesn't mean to go low carb. It just means to go with the correct carbs for your body. And last but not least is your activity level. Everybody thinks that they're active, but the type of people where activity level does start to make a difference is when you're doing more than 90 minutes of cardiovascular activity per day. Whether you're an athlete, maybe you're a nurse, maybe you're on your feet and you're just burning, and you're in that type of situation, you most likely are going to want to be on a moderate to even a moderately higher approach. So what do I mean by that? I consider moderate, but for women, 100 to 150 grams of carbs. I consider moderately high over 150 grams of carbohydrates per day. So with that being said, if you want to understand where you fall with regards to carb tolerance, there is a quiz in my book, Unlock Your Macrotype, in chapter 4. But what you guys can do, there is a macro typing quiz on my website, which is going to help you figure all of this out and put this within the context of how should you be arranging your total macronutrients and putting you on the best macro-based program for that. So it is very important that you understand your body's relationship with carbohydrates and these 6 factors. The quiz on my website will let you know whether your carb tolerance is very high, a macro type 1, or very, very, very low, a macro type 5. So if you have questions about your macro type, your carb tolerance, any of the information in my book, this is also available everywhere books are sold, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and whatnot. Please comment below, because this is a very important topic and it dictates the macronutrient split that you should be following. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.